The crystal wine glasses caught the afternoon light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Park Enterprises' executive tasting room. James Park adjusted his silk tie, surveying the carefully curated selection of wines arranged before the board members. At 32, he commanded respect in every room he entered, his presence as refined as the vintage Bordeaux he collected. Sarah Chen stood quietly near the back wall, her notebook ready to record the meeting's details. As James's personal assistant for the past 8 months, she had perfected the art of invisibility. Her modest gray dress and pulled-back hair helped her blend into the corporate landscape, exactly as she intended. "Gentlemen," James began, his voice carrying the confidence of someone born into wealth. "Today, we're discussing the acquisition of Chateau Margaux's exclusive distribution rights for the Asian market." The sommelier poured the first wine, a deep burgundy that seemed to glow in the afternoon light. James swirled it expertly, inhaling the complex bouquet before taking a measured sip. His expression revealed nothing, but Sarah noticed the slight tightening around his eyes that indicated disappointment. "The 2018 vintage lacks the complexity we expected," he announced. "The tannins are too aggressive, overshadowing the fruit." Board members nodded in agreement, though Sarah suspected few could distinguish between a Pinot Noir and a Merlot if their lives depended on it. She watched James move to the next wine, his movements precise and practiced. Everything about him spoke of privilege and education, from his Swiss watch to his handmade Italian shoes. "Now this," he said, lifting a glass of pale red wine, "is where things become interesting. Pinot Noir from Oregon's Willamette Valley." He paused dramatically, a slight smile playing at his lips. "You know, if someone could truly understand Pinot Noir, its subtleties, its temperament, I'd marry them on the spot." The room erupted in polite laughter. Sarah's pen stopped moving across her notebook. The laughter died as Sarah's clear voice cut through the room like a blade through silk. "The 2019 Domaine de la Côte shows classic Burgundian characteristics despite its California origin. Notes of cherry and earth, with that distinctive mineral finish that comes from limestone soil. The winemaker studied in Burgundy for 7 years. Every head turned toward her. James's wine glass remained suspended halfway to his lips, his dark eyes fixed on his assistant with an expression of complete bewilderment. The board members exchanged glances, their faces reflecting various degrees of surprise and confusion. Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks as she realized what she had done. 8 months of careful invisibility shattered in a single moment of weakness. She had worked so hard to be unremarkable, to fade into the background of James's sophisticated world. "I apologize," she said quickly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I shouldn't have spoken." But James set down his glass with deliberate precision, his gaze never leaving her face. "No, please continue. How do you know about Rajat Par's work at Domaine de la Côte?" The question hung in the air like morning mist over a vineyard. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she gripped her notebook tighter. She could feel the weight of everyone's attention, could sense the shift in the room's energy from casual business meeting to something far more charged. I read about it," she managed, though the words felt inadequate even as she spoke them. James took a step closer, his expression intense with curiosity. Reading about wine and understanding it are entirely different things. You identified characteristics that most sommeliers would miss. Sarah's carefully constructed world began to crack around the edges. She had spent months perfecting her role as the quiet, efficient assistant, but James's probing gaze seemed to see through every layer of protection she had built. The meeting concluded with unusual haste, board members filing out while stealing curious glances at Sarah. She remained frozen by the wall, her notebook clutched against her chest like armor. James dismissed the sommelier with a polite nod, leaving them alone in the suddenly cavernous tasting room. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft hum of the climate control system, maintaining perfect temperature for the remaining wines. James moved with predatory grace, circling the table until he stood directly in front of her. 8 months, he said quietly, his voice carrying a note she had never heard before. 8 months you've worked for me, and I know nothing about you. Sarah forced herself to meet his gaze, though every instinct screamed at her to look away. There's nothing to know, Mr. Park. I'm just your assistant. Just my assistant doesn't identify terroir characteristics in a blind tasting. He picked up the Oregon Pinot Noir, swirling it thoughtfully. This wine retails for $300 a bottle. Most people couldn't afford to taste it, let alone develop the palate to analyze it. Her throat felt dry as desert sand. I should return to my desk. You have a conference call with Tokyo in 20 minutes. Cancel it. The command was soft, but absolute. Sarah's fingers moved instinctively toward her phone, then stopped. Mr. Park, I can't just... You can, and you will. He set the wine down and moved closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and understated. I want to know who you really are, Sarah Chen. The way he said her name made her stomach flutter with dangerous emotions. For 8 months, she had been invisible, safe in her anonymity. Now his attention felt like standing in a spotlight, exposed and vulnerable. I'm nobody special, she whispered, but even she could hear the lie in her voice. That evening, James sat in his penthouse office overlooking Seoul's glittering skyline. Sarah's personnel file spread across his mahogany desk. The documents told a frustratingly sparse story. Graduated from Seoul National University with a degree in business administration, previous employment at a small accounting firm, no family listed as emergency contacts. He reached for his phone and dialed his head of security. I need a background check on Sarah Chen, my personal assistant. Everything you can find. How deep do you want me to go, sir? James considered the question while staring at Sarah's employee photo. Even in the formal headshot, there was something guarded about her expression, as if she were hiding behind a carefully constructed mask. Deep enough to find the truth. Meanwhile, 3 floors below in her modest apartment, Sarah stood before her bathroom mirror, studying her reflection with critical eyes. The woman staring back bore little resemblance to the confident vintner's daughter who had once walked through Napa Valley's most prestigious wineries with her father. She opened the medicine cabinet and retrieved a small wooden box hidden behind bottles of aspirin and vitamins. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, lay a silver pendant shaped like a grape cluster, the last gift her father had given her before everything fell apart. The weight of it in her palm brought back memories she had worked so hard to suppress. Morning walks through the vineyards, her father teaching her to identify different grape varieties by touch alone, the pride in his eyes when she successfully identified a wine's vintage and vineyard at age 16. Chen Mei Lin, she whispered to her reflection, using the name she had abandoned 3 years ago. What would father think of you now? The pendant caught the light, its surface worn smooth by years of handling. She had been someone once, someone with a future in the wine world. Now she was just Sarah Chen, invisible assistant to a man who was beginning to see too much. 3 years earlier, Chen Mei Lin had been the crown jewel of Chen Family Vineyards, one of Napa Valley's most respected boutique wineries. Her father, Chen Wei Ming, had built the business from nothing, transforming 20 acres of rocky hillside into a producer of award-winning Pinot Noir that commanded respect from critics worldwide. She had grown up among the vines, learning to read the subtle signs that indicated perfect ripeness, understanding how soil composition affected flavor profiles, developing a palate that could distinguish between grapes harvested days apart. Her father had groomed her to take over the family legacy, and she had embraced that future with passionate dedication. The memories felt like touching a wound that had never properly healed. She remembered the morning everything changed. Federal agents arriving at dawn, her father's face crumbling as they presented warrants for tax evasion and money laundering. The accusations had been devastating, but the evidence seemed ironclad. Within 6 months, Chen Family Vineyards was sold to pay legal fees and back taxes. Her father, broken by shame and stress, suffered a massive heart attack and died before his case went to trial. Mei Lin found herself alone, penniless, and carrying the weight of a scandal that made her unemployable in the wine industry. She had fled to Seoul, her mother's birthplace, and reinvented herself as Sarah Chen. The transformation required abandoning everything that had defined her expertise, her passion, her very identity. She became a ghost of her former self, taking whatever work she could find while carefully avoiding anything connected to wine. Until James Park's casual comment about Pinot Noir had shattered her carefully maintained facade. Now, holding her father's pendant, she wondered if running had been the right choice. Perhaps it was time to stop hiding from who she really was, regardless of the consequences. The next morning arrived gray and drizzling, Seoul's skyline obscured by low-hanging clouds. Sarah arrived at the office early, hoping to lose herself in routine tasks before James arrived. She was organizing his calendar when she heard his footsteps in the hallway, accompanied by another set she didn't recognize. James entered with a tall man in an expensive suit, someone whose presence immediately commanded attention. Sarah recognized him from business magazines. David Kim, CEO of Kim Hospitality Group and one of James's closest friends. "Sarah," James said, his voice carefully neutral. "Could you bring us coffee? The usual for me, and David takes his black." She nodded and moved toward the door, but David's voice stopped her. "Wait a moment." He studied her with sharp, intelligent eyes. "You look familiar. Have we met before?" Sarah's blood turned to ice. "I don't believe so, sir." But David's expression was thoughtful, as if he were solving a puzzle. Chen, that name rings a bell." His eyes widened with sudden recognition. "Chen Family Vineyards. You're Wei Ming Chen's daughter." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Sarah felt the color drain from her face as James's gaze snapped to her with laser intensity. "That's impossible," James said slowly. Chen Family Vineyards was one of Napa's most prestigious wineries. They were destroyed by scandal 3 years ago. The daughter disappeared after her father's death, David continued, his voice gentle but relentless. Mei Lin Chen. She was considered one of the most promising young vintners in California before everything fell apart. Sarah stood frozen, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her like a house of cards in a hurricane. 8 months of invisibility, of safety, of pretending to be someone else, all destroyed in a matter of seconds. "Is it true?" James asked quietly, his dark eyes searching her face for answers she wasn't ready to give. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. David, sensing the tension, quietly excused himself, leaving Sarah alone with James in the suddenly oppressive office space. Rain continued to streak the windows, creating shifting patterns of shadow and light across the polished floor. "Is it true?" James repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah's hands trembled as she set down the coffee tray she had been holding. "Mr. Park, I can explain." "Can you?" He moved around his desk, each step deliberate and controlled. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like my trusted assistant has been lying to me for 8 months. The hurt in his voice cut deeper than anger would have. Sarah had seen James negotiate million-dollar deals with ice-cold precision, had watched him dismiss incompetent employees without a flicker of emotion. But now his carefully maintained composure was cracking, revealing something raw and vulnerable beneath. "I never lied about my qualifications," she said desperately. "I do have a business degree. I am capable of doing this job." "That's not the point, and you know it." James stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could see the storm brewing in his dark eyes. "You're Chen Wei Ming's daughter. You're a trained vintner with more knowledge about wine than half the experts I consult, and you've been pretending to be nobody. Because I am nobody." The words burst from her with surprising force. "Don't you understand? My father was accused of crimes that destroyed everything we built. I couldn't get work in the wine industry. I couldn't even use my real name without people looking at me like I was a criminal." James's expression softened slightly, but his voice remained steady. "So you decided to hide, to waste your talents filing papers and scheduling meetings." "I decided to survive," she whispered, tears threatening to spill over. "It was the only choice I had." James moved to the window, his silhouette dark against the gray Seoul skyline. The rain had intensified, drumming against the glass with increasing urgency. Sarah remained where she stood, afraid that any movement might shatter the fragile moment between them. "Tell me about your father," he said quietly, not turning around. The request caught her off guard. She had expected anger, dismissal, perhaps even termination. Instead, James was asking her to share the most painful chapter of her life. "He was brilliant," she began, her voice barely audible. "He came to America with nothing but a dream and $20,000. Worked in other people's vineyards for 15 years, learning everything he could about terroir and winemaking." James turned slightly, his profile etched against the storm outside. "When he finally bought our land, everyone said he was crazy. The soil was too rocky, the slope too steep. But he saw something others missed." Sarah's voice grew stronger as she spoke about her father's vision. "He understood that struggle creates character, in both grapes and people." "What happened?" James asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the broad strokes. "Someone was using our distribution network to launder money. We never knew. The federal investigation painted us as willing participants, but we were just naive." Her voice cracked on the last word. "Dad trusted the wrong people. When everything came out, he couldn't handle the shame." James finally turned to face her fully, his expression unreadable. "And you blamed yourself?" It wasn't a question, but Sarah nodded anyway. "I should have seen the signs. I should have protected him. You were 22 years old. I was his partner, his heir. I failed him." The tears she had been holding back finally spilled over, 3 years of suppressed grief and guilt pouring out in the safety of James's office. James crossed the room in 3 quick strides, pulling a handkerchief from his jacket pocket. The gesture was so unexpectedly gentle that Sarah's tears flowed harder. She accepted the offered cloth, acutely aware of how close he stood, of the warmth radiating from his body. "You didn't fail anyone," he said firmly. "You survived a tragedy that would have destroyed most people." Sarah looked up at him through tear-blurred vision, seeing something in his expression she had never noticed before. Beneath the polished exterior of the successful businessman was a man who understood loss, who recognized the weight of carrying family expectations. "I should resign," she whispered. "I've compromised your trust." "Have you?" James tilted his head, studying her with those penetrating dark eyes. "Or have you just revealed that you're far more valuable than either of us realized?" The words confused her. "I don't understand." James moved back to his desk, but instead of sitting behind it, he leaned against the edge, making himself more accessible. "Park Enterprises is expanding into wine distribution. We're looking to establish partnerships with boutique wineries, particularly in the American market." Sarah's heart began to race as she understood where this conversation was heading. "I need someone who understands wine culture, someone who can identify quality and authenticity, someone who knows the difference between a genuine artisan and a pretender." His gaze never left her face. "I need someone like you." "James, I can't—" "Not as my assistant," he interrupted. "As my wine consultant. As the expert you were trained to be." The offer hung between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. Sarah felt the weight of possibility, the terrifying prospect of stepping back into the world she had fled. But also, for the first time in 3 years, she felt the stirring of something she had thought dead: hope. "You're asking me to go back to California," Sarah said, her voice barely steady. "To face people who remember the scandal." James nodded slowly. "I'm asking you to reclaim what was stolen from you. Your expertise, your passion, your rightful place in the wine world." The proposal was both thrilling and terrifying. Sarah had spent 3 years building walls around her heart, protecting herself from the pain of her former life. Now, James was asking her to tear down those walls and step back into the arena where she had been so brutally defeated. "What if I'm not good enough anymore?" The question escaped before she could stop it, revealing the deep insecurity that had driven her into hiding. "Yesterday you identified characteristics in a wine that impressed a room full of supposed experts," James reminded her. "Your palate hasn't forgotten, even if your confidence has." He moved closer again, and Sarah caught that subtle scent of his cologne mixed with something uniquely him. "I have a confession to make," he said quietly. "I've been watching you for months, wondering why someone with your intelligence and education was content to remain invisible." The admission sent heat coursing through her veins. "You've been watching me? The way you organize my schedule shows an understanding of wine harvest cycles. You always know which restaurants have the best wine programs. You flinch whenever I make a poor pairing choice." His lips curved in a slight smile. "I thought you might be a wine enthusiast. I never imagined you were a professional." Sarah felt exposed under his scrutiny, but also seen in a way she hadn't been in years. "If I do this," she said carefully, "if I agree to help you, there are things you need to know about me, about what happened." "Then tell me," James said simply. "Tell me everything." That evening they sat in James's private dining room, a bottle of 2015 Burgundy breathing between them. Sarah had changed from her conservative work attire into a simple black dress that James had never seen before, and the transformation was startling. Without her armor of professional invisibility, she looked younger, more vulnerable, but also more alive. "The money laundering operation was sophisticated," she began, swirling the wine in her glass with practiced ease. "They used our distribution network to move dirty money through legitimate wine sales. Inflated prices, fake transactions, shell companies buying non-existent vintages." James listened without interruption, his attention focused entirely on her words. "We were perfect targets," Sarah continued, "small enough to control, prestigious enough to legitimize large transactions. My father's reputation opened doors that would have remained closed to obvious criminals." "How long before you discovered what was happening?" "Too late." The words carried 3 years of regret. "By the time we realized something was wrong, the FBI was already building their case. They had recordings, financial records, evidence that made us look complicit." James reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. The contact sent electricity up her arm. "But you weren't complicit. Try proving that to a federal prosecutor looking for convictions." Sarah's voice hardened with remembered pain. "They offered my father a plea deal. Admit guilt, serve 2 years, and they'd leave me alone. He refused, said he wouldn't destroy my future to save himself. So he fought the charges, and died of a heart attack 3 weeks before trial." Sarah's voice broke on the last word. The stress, the shame, the knowledge that everything he'd built was being destroyed. It killed him. James's hand closed over hers, warm and steady. "I'm sorry," he said simply, and somehow those 2 words carried more comfort than all the sympathy she had received in 3 years. The wine between them had warmed to perfect drinking temperature, its complex bouquet filling the intimate space. Sarah found herself relaxing for the first time in months. The weight of her secrets finally lifted from her shoulders. There's something else, she said, meeting James's gaze directly. Something I haven't told anyone. He waited patiently, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. I think my father was murdered. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. James's expression sharpened, his businessman's instincts immediately alert. The heart attack was convenient timing, Sarah continued. 3 weeks before trial, when his lawyer was confident they could prove his innocence, the people who used our business had millions of dollars at stake. Do you have proof? Suspicions, questions that were never answered. A coroner who rushed the autopsy, medical records that disappeared. She shook her head in frustration. Nothing concrete enough to take to the police. James was quiet for a long moment, processing this revelation. When he spoke, his voice carried a note of steel that Sarah had never heard before. If we're going to work together, if you're going to help me build this wine division, then we're going to do more than just taste vintages and negotiate contracts. What do you mean? I mean we're going to find the truth about what happened to your father. James's grip on her hand tightened. I have resources, connections, investigators who specialize in financial crimes. If there's evidence to be found, we'll find it. The offer was overwhelming in its generosity and its implications. Sarah realized that accepting James's help would mean more than just returning to the wine world. It would mean trusting him with her deepest pain and her most dangerous secrets. Why? She whispered. Why would you do that for me? James released her hand and stood, moving to the window that overlooked Seoul's glittering night skyline. The city stretched endlessly in all directions, millions of lights creating a tapestry of human ambition and dreams. Because I know what it's like to lose someone you love to circumstances beyond your control, he said quietly. Sarah waited, sensing that he was about to share something equally personal. My father built Park Enterprises from nothing, just like yours built the vineyard. He worked 18-hour days, sacrificed everything for success. James's reflection in the window looked haunted. When I was 25, he had a stroke during a board meeting. Died instantly. I'm sorry, Sarah said, understanding now why her story had affected him so deeply. The doctor said it was stress-related. Years of pressure, of carrying the weight of everyone's expectations. James turned back to face her. I blamed myself for not seeing the signs, for not forcing him to slow down. But that's different from what happened to my father. Is it? James interrupted gently. We both lost our fathers to the weight of responsibility. We both carry guilt that isn't really ours to bear. The parallel between their experiences created an unexpected intimacy. Sarah felt something shift between them, a recognition that went deeper than professional respect or physical attraction. When I made that joke about marrying someone who understood Pinot Noir, James continued, I never expected to find someone who understood loss the way you do. The words sent heat flooding through Sarah's chest. James, I know this complicates everything, he said, moving back toward her. Business relationships, professional boundaries, the fact that you work for me. Worked, Sarah corrected softly. If I accept your offer, if I become your wine consultant, then technically I won't be your employee anymore. Technically, James agreed, his voice dropping to a whisper as he stopped directly in front of her chair. Sarah stood slowly, bringing herself face to face with James in the soft lighting of the dining room. The burgundy had left a subtle flush on her cheeks, and her eyes held a warmth that had been absent for 3 years. If we do this, she said carefully, if we work together to build your wine division and investigate what happened to my father, there can't be any secrets between us. No secrets, James agreed, his hand rising to cup her cheek with infinite gentleness. And if we discover something dangerous, something that puts us both at risk, we face it together. Together, he confirmed, his thumb brushing across her skin with reverent care. The space between them seemed to crackle with electricity. Sarah could feel her carefully constructed walls crumbling. 3 years of emotional protection dissolving under the intensity of James's gaze. "I'm scared," she whispered, the admission costing her everything. "So am I," James replied honestly. "But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you." The words broke the last of her resistance. Sarah rose on her tiptoes, closing the distance between them until their lips met in a kiss that tasted of wine and promises and the possibility of redemption. James's arms came around her, holding her as if she were something precious and fragile. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing unsteadily. "So," James said, his forehead resting against hers, "does this mean you accept my offer?" Sarah smiled, the expression transforming her face with radiant joy. "I accept," she said. "All of it. The job, the investigation, the partnership." "And us?" James asked, his voice vulnerable in a way that made her heart ache. "Especially us," Sarah confirmed, sealing the promise with another kiss that tasted like the beginning of everything. Outside, Seoul sparkled with infinite possibility, and for the first time in 3 years, Sarah Chen, Mei Lin Chen, was ready to reclaim her future.